Hello, everyone. This is Rabbi Brian Bileci, Brian Baruch Bileci. So glad to have you join us tonight for some Hebrew. We are live right now, and we're just so grateful you have joined us. And if you haven't already subscribed to our YouTube account, make sure you subscribe, like, comment, let us know you're out there. Also, if you are watching on Facebook Live right now, we're excited to have you join us, and we are going to jump into some beginning Hebrew. Sometimes we go a little bit more with advanced ideas, but for the most part, we're here to answer your questions. So if you even have questions or comments and you'd like to let us know you're out there, give us a thumbs up, a little heart, a little emoji out there. If you have a question, go ahead and throw it up, and I will, during our Q&A time, answer some questions about basic Hebrew. Hebrew is the language called Ivrit in the language of Hebrew, and Ivrit is a pure tongue, Lashon HaKodesh. So we're grateful that you have joined us to learn the language of the Bible. So powerful that you can learn the Bible, read the Bible in Hebrew when you learn it in its original context with an original understanding of the way the letters work, how to read the Hebrew, one syllable at a time. And as we jump into another Hebrew lesson, we're also going to be taking a look at the portion for the Torah this week that we are studying called Terumah or Trumah, depending on your speed of Hebrew, or if you're Israeli, or if you're an American Jew, or you're a Jew from around the world, you might have a different pronunciation. But Terumah or Trumah actually refers to the offering that was lifted up to God, as they would give it at the tabernacle for the Kohanim, the priests, to be able to fulfill their role in the house of God. And later in the temple, we had a first temple and a second temple. First temple was Solomon's temple. Second temple is sometimes called Herod's temple. And that's in the Gospels that you see Yeshua the Messiah going to the temple and studying with the rabbis, even at the age of 12, going into 13, probably 12 and a half. He was studying with the rabbis. He was studying with the sages of Israel, with the teachers, and asking questions and learning the portions, just like you and I need to learn the Torah portions. So we dive into the Word of God tonight, dive into the Torah. Let's meditate not only day, but night. Now, if you're watching tonight, you'll know that around the world, like some friends of ours that are watching from India, you will know that it is morning time for them. So we have those that are watching from India, like Joseph. Joseph, why don't you show yourself on camera and wave to our audience out there? And Patricia, she's giving us a still picture. She's out there. We also have Miriam on there. I don't think she has a camera going right now, but we're just excited about jumping in for this portion. Again, this is Rabbi Brian Baruch Bileci. We are live right now, so get ready, jump on. Again, if you have questions and comments, you can just let us know that since we're live on Facebook, that you're out there. So as we jump into our lesson today, I want you to know that when it comes to Hebrew and it comes to understanding how Hebrew works, we have to understand that the Hebrew language is different from English and other languages. It's written from right to left. From right to left. Now, as we read it one letter at a time with a corresponding vowel. And we're going to be using the Nukud vocalization. So as we jump in tonight, just imagine when you talk about writing Hebrew, and you talk about how it's written from the ancient Paleo Hebrew all the way to modern Hebrew today, like the letter Aleph and Beit, where you have the picture, a pictograph of a house. And also we have the Gimel, which is a picture of a camel originally that was drawn. So whether you're starting with the letter Aleph, like the alphabet, or Aleph Beit, we know the Aleph Beit gives us the language that we know through a 22 consonant letter alphabet in the Hebrew tongue. So let's go ahead and jump right into our lesson today. I'm going to go ahead and take you through some basics of Hebrew today. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into some of the Hebrew alphabet. And we'll start with the Aleph Beit that we see here. Aleph Beit. Now, important that we see how we can apply the Hebrew language to our study of the Torah. Let's go ahead and start with our Aleph Beit, 5 letters at a time. Aleph is the first letter, Beit is the second, so Aleph Beit is the alphabet. And we're going to take a little breath after each 5th letter until we get to all 22. All right, on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Aleph, Beit, Gimel, Dalet, Hey. Vav, Zain, Chet, Tet, Yud. Kaf, Lamed, Mem, Nun, Samech, Ein, Pe, Tzadi, Kuf, Resh, last two, Shin, Tav. Now, we said we have 22 letters, 22 consonant letters that we're working with, and half of them can be a prefix. And before we talk about those prefixes, let's talk about how we actually work with the language of Hebrew. Now, when we're actually using the aleph beit, we use what we call a nikud vocalization. Nikud means the dottings or pointings underneath the letter, because we usually look at the Hebrew one letter at a time with the corresponding vowel. And that is C plus V equaling an open syllable, or C plus V plus C equaling a closed syllable. C is for consonant, V is for vowel. Again, we're using nikud vocalization for the traditional A, E, I, O, and U, but pronounced A, E, O, U. So when you're taking a word like shalom, shalom, we know that it starts, as you see here in yellow, with an open syllable, just the letter shin and a vowel underneath called a kamatz for the ah sound, and that would give us sha, sha. Shalom, shalom. So we proceed to add to the shin and the kamatz, which is right underneath. It looks like a little T. We add the lamed. We have a letter vav that should be a V, but in this case it's an O with the dot on top, indicating to change the vowel sound, or to use this vav as what we call a vowel indicator, The aleph, the hey, the vav, the yud, and the ein can be various vowels, and here's a couple of examples. So then we move to the last letter, which will be our closing C for this closed syllable, starting with the lamed, a vav with the dot on top, we call cholam vav, and then the letter mem in a different form than we normally know it. This is called mem sofit, because remember, 5 of our letters out of 22 can have a different look at the end of the word, and that would be the kaf, the backward looking C with the dot in the center, or if we remove the dagesh, the dot in the center, it's called or pronounced chaf. And then we have chaf sofit, so it looks completely different at the end of the word. Mem, pretty simple, there's only one other way to write it, and that's mem sofit, and that's what we're using for shalom. Nun would be nun sofit, pe or fe would be fe sofit, and sadi would be sadi sofit. So again, shalom starts with the letter lamed, uses a vowel indicator. We're using the vav as a vowel indicator. And the way we indicate that it's a change of a sound, we actually put a dot on top and say, oh, look at that bird in the air. And then we use the mem, which is mem sofit, mem sofit. So shalom, sha is open, lom with the closing mem sofit is closed. So shalom, shalom. And shalom is a perfect way to greet someone, especially if you really want to greet the proper way in Israel. Say shalom, shalom every day until you get to say Shabbat shalom. So we want to make sure that we're using the nikud vocalization for spelling out these letters one letter at a time, or transliterating them into English with English letters, so that we have the traditional way it's written, shalom. But we start one letter at a time. Shalom. Shalom. Very important. Now, importance of Hebrew. When it comes to Paleo Hebrew, which Patty has just commented here, is Paleo Hebrew the true origin of the language? I am so glad you asked, Patty, and I'm so glad that you have joined us today. So that is a great question. And in fact, I'm really encouraging all of you out there to ask questions on Facebook so that I can share your question with everyone. We also have our Zoom family that I'd love to be able to see if they have questions also. But for the most part, those that are watching on Facebook, you can share by way of comment. So let's talk about that, and let's think about how Hebrew works. So again, we're going to take a look at a couple things today. Let me first start with our portion. Exodus 25:1. It's going to lead right into some Paleo Hebrew. So Shemot, which is the Hebrew way to say Exodus, Shemot means names. And we see that Shemot, or Exodus 25:1 says in the Tree of Life version, Adonai, which means Lord, spoke to Moses, which in Hebrew would be Moshe, saying, Tell B'nai Yisrael, which means in plural, sons of Israel, to take up an offering for me. The Hebrew word for offering is terumah, or trumah, depending on how fast you pronounce your Hebrew. From anyone whose heart compels him to take my offering. And again, trumah is the word for offering. We'll see we add a suffix to make my offering. So we see that it shows up again in the minor prophet of Malachi, or you might pronounce it as Malachi 3:8. Will a man rob God? For you are robbing me, the Lord says. But you say, how have we robbed you? In the tithe, maaser, and the offering, in plural, trumot, literally offerings. Trumah becomes trumot, plural of trumah, which is offering. But in the text that we're looking at, where it says my offering, we see another combination. Instead of just changing the suffix or changing the ending of the word from trumah to trumot, we have trumati, which is a contraction of trumah, or if you're saying it a little slower, terumah. We see it's a contraction with ani. And again, trumot would be the plural offerings, the feminine plural form offerings. Now, when we look at the root and we look at the infinitive form, let's start with the infinitive form. We have one form of this root is lerumim, to lift. The shorish, a little bit more familiar, is room. So that's where you get terumah. Room is shorish for lift up, raise, or exalt. And you might be familiar with saying ram, which means lifted up, raised, or exalted. We refer to God as Ram Venisa, high and lofty one, or high and exalted one. Or King James might say high and lifted up. So Ram Venisa is, again, Ram, which means to be lifted up, to be exalted. And Nisa also is another way to lift. Nisa, like Parashat Naso. So we find this statement, Ram Venisa, in Isaiah 57:15, which is the prophet Yeshayahu. Yeshayahu, very close to Yeshua or Yehoshua, but in reverse. Yeshayahu means salvation is of the Lord, of Yah. And Yeshua or Yehoshua, the full Hebrew, means that just like with salvation is of the Lord, we have the reverse. The Lord is salvation, or the Lord saves. Yah saves. Yes, Yeshayahu. Okay, so Yeshayahu is salvation is of the Lord, and Yehoshua is the Lord saves. For thus says the high and exalted one. So notice this, the high and exalted one, who inhabits in eternity, whose name is holy. Kadosh, holy. I dwell in a high and a holy place, yet also with a contrite and humble spirit, to revive the spirit of the humble and revive the heart of the contrite. So this is where we see Ram Venisa, translated high and exalted one. Again, all from the same root as trumah. So we have trumati and trumot, all coming from the same root of Terumah, which would be room. The root is shoresh. We get the form ram, and we get ram venisah. So, in modern Hebrew today, we still use this root. For instance, I might use the pronoun ani for myself to say I. Ani is I, and merim. Merim would be I lift. I lift. Ani merim. I could even keep it in the masculine form, but in third person, and say hu merim, which means he lifts, because who is he? Not to be confused with WHO, who. Who is he? We say who is he, and he is she, because the way you say she is he, but pronounced the same way as HE, but spelled HI. Not to confuse you, but just keep in mind that who means he. So who, same form of the verb, merim, is present tense to lift. So ani merim, hu merim. Or if you use the feminine, he, not to be confused with HE in English for a man, he is she, and he merima. He merima. She lifts. Now, you might be more familiar with this root in the form of a name, because you might be familiar with Avram. Avram. Now remember, Avram is a contraction of two words, or a conjunction of two words, or we call a compound, actually. Avram. So we're using the word Ram, which means exalted, but we start with Avram, which means exalted father. So here's where we look at some Paleo-Hebrew. And this is the original form of Hebrew. So very good. Now, just out of comment here, we see that Patty also mentioned that I've seen different paleo charts and wasn't sure which was correct. It's very true that it can be very confusing sometimes looking at different charts. What I like to do, though, is compare the charts with these roots to the words to see if there's a connection to the most ancient form of Hebrew. So very good. We see that Mary Lou is also watching. Good to have you, Mary Lou, with us. And again, I love Patty's questions on Paleo-Hebrew and the different charts that can be found. But again, Mary Lou has just joined us, and some of you can ask your questions right here, and I will put your question up if you're watching on Facebook Live. So we see that, again, Avram is the name that we know has changed to officially Avraham. So we start with Av, which is father. So the first part of Avram, which you also know in English is Abram. Avram, the second half, is Ram, which means exalted. So together, Av and Ram means exalted father, because Av is father. In the Aramaic form, Av is daddy, papa, Abba, which literally has an Aramaic suffix on the end of Av, which is the extra aleph. Now, the aleph is a picture of an ox head of strength, So we see that the letter beit, if you add it, is a picture of a house. So who is the strength of the house? Or like an ox head, who is the head of the family? That would be Abba, or Av, the father. He is the head of the house. So by looking at these Paleo-Hebrew letters, the aleph, with the Paleo-Hebrew on the right of an ox head, you'll find that looks very familiar in the reference to looking at Greek, because if you look at aleph and how the Greeks borrowed the Semitic tongue and made alpha, you can actually see how the aleph, or the ox head looks very similar to a lowercase alpha. Alpha. Now, again, you'll see a comparison to many of the Greek letters, like the letter bet for beta, or in modern Greek, vita with a V sound. Just like the letter bet can be a V if you remove the dagesh in the center. Or like the dalet, that is a picture of the delta. Notice the Paleo-Hebrew is a triangle, just like the capital delta is a triangle, because it's the same letter. It's the same exact letter. And you can even see gimel is very similar to gamma. And if you turn the Paleo-Hebrew upside down, you see the gamma, as it's kind of pronounced in Greek, gamma. The gamma actually looks very similar to the gimel in ancient Hebrew and ancient Greek. The letter he, the H gets drops, and we have the E of he, and we have epsilon. Epsilon, some people pronounce it epsilon, but in modern Greek it's epsilon. And then the vav, you can see the similarities between what they call vowel or wow, and also can be a F sound when you actually go from Greek into like German. You see the V and the F, the fricative sound of the V to the F sound, like Volkswagen. The Volkswagen is the folks' wagon, or the people's car. So Volks is really the F sound of Volkswagen, just like W is actually a V. Wagner would be Wagner, which is very important when you're looking at Paleo-Hebrew and modern Hebrew and how it gets translated into Greek and then Aramaic, from Aramaic to Greek to Latin and then to German. You can see that the W of God's name really is a V. Yud He Vav He. So everything that we learn about when it comes to Hebrew is based upon this ancient tongue that was in a Paleo-Hebrew form, an ancient form. In fact, let's take a look at some more Paleo-Hebrew. And this is how we know that there is a ancient root, Patty, as you asked the question when it comes to, is Paleo-Hebrew the true origin of the language, and you wanted to know kind of which chart to use. Well, I find that I can't really use anyone's chart, hook, line, and sinker, when it comes to the Hebrew. I have to actually go back to the Bible and see if I can make a connection. So what I found in my studies is, as I began to study the Bible, I found out there were words. Oh, sorry, one of my slides changed. There were words that were similar, and Aleph is one of them. Aleph and Elef is a picture of an ox. Beit, like bite, is a picture of a house. We have Gimel, a camel. We have, and by the way, camel in Hebrew is actually Gamal, so we can see where camel came from Gamal or Gimel. The Dalet was a picture of a delet, a door. Hay, thought to be a window of revelation, to behold something, like when we say Hine matov u'manayim shebet achim gam yachad. Behold how good and how pleasant it is for brothers to dwell together in unity. La 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 la. I don't want to sing the whole song, but some of you know Hine. All right, so when we talk about the vav, which is a hook, we still use it to this day for hooking two things together, like and. The zayin, a weapon or sword. Chet, a fence or separation. Tet, a snake or something coiled like a snake, even coiled like a basket. The Yud, the first letter of God's tetragrammaton, his name, his sacred name, is an ineffable name. We know that Yud is the first letter, which is a hand, because his hand has created all things, or brings all things into existence. So Yud He Vav He actually is the Yud in front of the verb root for existence. the verb to be, in the past, and can be translated in the future. The kaf, the closed hand or palm of the hand. Chaf sofit is also a form of that. The lamed is an ox goad, which is a teaching tool. We use it for the root to learn. So lamed, lomed is like lamed. We see lomed means to learn. Well, how can you learn unless someone is teaching you? Mem is like mime, water. And then there's mem sofit. Nun is like a fish that reproduces rapidly. So it refers to reproducing as well as to the image of a fish. And remember, whenever you think of Hebrew, you think function over form. So this idea of a fish is really to reproduce. And by the way, Nun is the name of the father of Yehoshua, Joshua. He's Joshua ben Nun. Joshua, we say sometimes son of Nun or Nun, but it's actually Nun in Hebrew. And Nun Sofit also is a form of that same letter. And then Samech, which is a prop to support oneself. And then Ein is an eye, but can also be a fountain, because a fountain is the eye of the earth giving its tears of water. And then Pe is a mouth, and could even refer to something opening, like a mouth. Sadi is a fishhook, also called Sadiq, the righteous one. And then Kuf, the back of the head, sometimes translated a monkey, probably because a monkey probably has a big head. And then if you're looking more at the front of the head or the top of the head, it's Reish, which we'll see in a minute, is like Rosh. So Rosh is the head, Reish is the picture of the head that is the name of the letter. Shin, teeth, but also that which devours or eats like fire would eat. So basically you almost see the flames of fire there when you look at the letter Shin. But it's also a picture of teeth, which devour. God is a consuming fire, and consume is an intensive form of eat. And then the letter Tav, which some would define as a cross, but it's a mark or a sign of some kind. X marks the spot. So there's your basic Paleo-Hebrew, and you can actually look up the roots of these words in the Strong's Concordance and see how it relates to be able to see which chart is closer to the right one. Sometimes I have to kind of mix and match to say, well, they say it's this, they say it's that, but this is what the actual Bible or the Torah or the prophets reveal these roots to be related to. Okay? So when you talk about the idea of Paleo-Hebrew, and you're talking about the ancient way it was written, we have to remember, just like there is the letter Vav, which is a hook, I want to share with you how we use Vav when it comes to a prefix. The letter Vav, in what we call a conjunction or conjunctional prefix, can be Vav, which we would either say Ve, and Vav or Vavim is hooks. We would also have Va, which adds the word the to it. It steals the A vowel or A sound for the prefix that we use for the to make and the. So Ve or Va. We can also lengthen the sound of the vowel and make it a longer Va, like vayeled, vayeled. Now, I have to explain to you something that we can't go into depth with, but there are certain letters that really require you to strengthen or lengthen the vowel. Patty, I'm glad you find it interesting. Keep learning with us. You'll learn even more. So the letter Vav is again and. So if I want to say and a boy, I would say va yeled. To really separate the va from yeled, which is boy, I need to lengthen the vowel so that they don't just slide together. Vayeled. We have to say va yeled, va yeled, va yeled. It intensifies that sound of the ah for the word and, by making it the kamatz underneath and not the patach. So vayeled, I would do that with the letter yud, as we see here. Yeled is boy. So, and a boy would be vayeled. So notice the prefix is being added to the word that is being hooked. So if I said a man and a boy, I would put the vav in front of the second word, not the first one, because and goes between the two words. So vayeled would mean and a boy. We would attach it as a prefix, because remember, we have 22 Hebrew letters, 11 of them, half of the alphabet, can be used as a prefix. Now you say, what do you mean by a prefix? Well, let's stop a minute and review something we looked at a few weeks ago. We know that the prepositional prefix, the letter beit, with a sheva underneath it, is the first letter of the Bible. And that is found in book of Genesis, 1:1. Bereshit is the name of the book, and Bereshit is the first word of the book. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. So what are we doing? We're taking the letter beit. We're adding a sound underneath called a shva na. A shva na. Shva na, the vowel is called a shva. And I know we didn't officially do our vowels, but I thought here's be a good time to add this in. Shva is one of our vowels that when we looked with the a vowel pronounced a, we have the kamatz malay, the patach, and the chataf patach. Kamatz would be long, including kamatz malay. Patach would be medium, if there's only one line under the letter. And then shortened from medium to just short would be chataf patach. We add two dots called a shva on the right side of the line, the patach. So we have kamatz malay, long, patach, medium, chataf patach, short. So that will determine how long we pronounce the vowel. Ah, ah, ah. So we shorten the sound of the vowel based upon what nikud vocalization is underneath the letter. And the moment we go to the E vowel, we have more options. We have a couple forms of a long E vowel pronounced eh, two dots. It would be eh, sere yud, eh, segol yud, also eh, because the yud would elongate the normal segol, which would be medium, eh. And then we even have a short form, hataf segol, eh. So we have eh, and eh. And then we have even one that's even quicker if you can do it, eh, which is the reason why most of the time Israelis don't pronounce it. They hardly do. So terumah becomes truma because they hardly pronounce it at all. Truma. But it's really terumah. You have to go real quick and pronounce the first E under the letter tav to make terumah. But it's hardly pronounced at all. And this shava can either be a short E sound called a shva na, which is a moving sound where you just move from one consonant to the next with a little bit of sound. Shva, just like you hear in the word shva. It's a shva na under the first letter. But then there's another shva, and that is called a shva nach. Shva nach. And that one you don't pronounce. It comes to a glottal stop. I wish we had time to break down all of it. If we have time, we might come back to that and learn about the shva nach. But I want to kind of pick back up with the vav. So we found out that we have and a boy, vayeled. Vayeled. But the sound of the vav will change if it's in front of four letters that we use the acronym BUMP to remember. What is bump? Bump is just the four letters, the letter beit, the vav, being used for a U, the mem, which is the M, and the letter pei, which is the P. Bump. It's just an acronym in English. Bump. B-U-M-P would be the letter beit, vav, mem, and pei. So anytime we add the vav as a prefix in front of a word that starts with one of these four letters, the sound of the vav changes from v to u. U. It becomes what we call a shuruk. Shuruk. So let's go back to our E vowels just for a second. We have the sere, we have the segol, we have the chatasagol, and we have the shva. Now, normally those multiple dots looking like multiple eggs give us the S sound. But remember, there's one time that once we go to one dot, which is the I vowel pronounced E, E, so multiple dots, one dot, E. And if you want more explanation, look at our previous videos and we'll give you more description of this. We use the vav normally for the O when we put the dot over it up in the air, like in shalom, the dot over the vav takes it from a V to an O. And usually that O, look at that bird in the air, that dot floating in the air over the vav, makes it an O sound. And if we move the dot to the side, ooh, we call it shuruk. Shuruk. So all we did was take the V of the vav and make it ooh, called shuruk, by putting a dot on the side. So this is what we're doing when we use this vav for and. If we have va and we change it to ooh, then it's going to be and a son, uven. Uven. Now this is interesting. We have one of the letters for the word son, ben. Ben. Now we just had boy, which was yeled. But in this case, ben. Now you might be familiar with ben because we talked about the 12 tribes of Israel. We said 12 tribes. There was Reuben. Did you hear that? Reuben. Reuben. Ben. Behold a son. Reuven in Hebrew. So in Hebrew, there is no dagesh in the letter beit. So it's not Reuben, it's Reuven. Notice the shva underneath the letter resh. Reuven. So resh, the aleph is silent until you get a vav with a dot on the side, on the left side of it, because we're reading from right to left. So we have re, the resh with the shva underneath, the aleph with the shuruk, re, and then instead of ben, we have ven, reuven. And the letter beit doesn't have the dagesh in there. Because remember, the letter beit should have a dagesh if it's going to be a B sound, a B. So we have either the letter beit with the dagesh or the letter veit with no dagesh. So that we change it from a B to a V. Very similar to what we said about Greek. Modern Greek actually has the letter beit as beta, but they also pronounce it today as vita. Vita. So it goes from a B to a V sound. So when you talk about these sons, these 12 tribes of Israel, we have not only the letter beit becoming the letter veit in Reuben. So Reuben is Reuven. And of course, their mother Leah also had Shimon, which means hearing, Levi, which means joined to, and Yehudah, which means praise. We know that there's another son called Binyamin. Binyamin, which you know as Benjamin. So now we change again from Ben to Bin. Binyamin. But it's in English Benjamin. Benjamin, son of my right hand. So here we have Ben, which is son. And we know that when you're referring to that name Ben, as in Reuben, it means son, but it changes sound. So if we go back to the vav, which we were talking about, and a son, we have to understand that there is a change not only in the letter vav for and, but there's also a change in the letter beit, because the dot that was received by the vav was stolen from the beit. When we said ven, we actually took the dot out of the beit because of this bump rule, this bump acronym, that before one of these letters, the beit, the vav, the mem, and the letter pei, the dagesh is taken from those letters and put inside the letter vav. So it is uven. Uven instead of uben. It's uven. And a son. That is because there's a special rule for also 6 letters called Begad Kifat. The letter Beit, Gimel, Dalet, Kaf, Pe, and Tav. The letters lose their dagesh. These letters, these Begad Kifat letters that are fricative letters, that normally with the dagesh they would be a strong sound, but they become fricative when you remove the letter, the dagesh out of the letter Beit. It goes from B to V, becomes fricative. And the Gimel no longer has that fricative sound, but it went from G to R. That became fricative. See how it vibrates? It's fricative. Or the letter Dalet, from D to D, almost like a TH sound. Adam, instead of Adam. It's not that strong of a D. Adam. It's almost like a TH sound, but not as strong of a TH like in English. The Kaf becomes Chaf, fricative. Pe becomes Fe. You hear that fricative sound? So we go from P to fricative. And Tav, among Ashkenazis, they have different rules sometimes where the Tav of Shabbat becomes Shabbos. But in most cases, it would be transliterated TH from T to T. So that's where the letter Beit becomes Beth, as in Bethany and Bethlehem. TH. It's the Tav without the dagesh. So there's a lot of rules that some of you are unfamiliar with, but you'll see that these rules are very important when it comes to transliterating words, even knowing how they've been translated through translated into English and other languages. There's all kinds of rules, like how did we go from Shimon to Simeon? I mean, it's really confusing when you think of Simeon and originally Shimon. Now here's a perfect example of a Shava Nach, because it doesn't sound under the mem. It's Shim. It's not Shimeon. It's Shimon. But the translators decided to spell it as an E. Simeon. See how they translated the Shava Nach to a Shava Na to sound it as an E? So they put an E in there. Simeon. It's not a Shava Na. It's a Shava Nach. It comes to a glottal stop. Shim. Separate syllable. On. Shim. On. 2 closed syllables. Shim. On. And the only way to know that is you have to know the rule of the Shava Na and the Shava Nach. So the Shava Na is sounded in certain times, and the Shava Nach is also a glottal stop or a resting at certain times. So would you guys like to learn a couple of the ways that we use the Shava Na and the Shava Nach? All right, so I think we have a couple minutes we can utilize. Let's go ahead and look at some basic rules. The Shava Na and the Shava Nach are all based upon the dagesh kal and the dagesh lenne. Now, we need a formal lesson just on the dagesh by itself. That's the dot that we normally put in the letter Beit and the Begad Kifat letters. But here's a basic concept you can look here at number 1. Shava Na. Shava Na is a moving shva, meaning it is pronounced and not blended with the preceding letter. We don't blend it, because what happens with the Shava Nach, it does blend with the previous vowel. So a Shava Na must be moving, or what we could say is sounding. It does not blend with the previous letter or vowel to make a closed syllable. A Shava Nach is the opposite, though. Instead of moving or sounding, it's resting. Shava Nach, you can hear it come to a glottal stop, meaning it is not pronounced and creates a glottal stop, or is called quiescent, quiet, or a silent shva. silent. It comes to a glottal stop. So one of our examples that we can look at is if we take the first 5 letters of the alphabet, they will give us clues or rules to when to use the Shava Na. Here's a simple reminder. Take the letter Aleph, which is the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. If a Shava appears as the first letter of the word, it is always a Shava Na. So let's say it differently. If Aleph is the first letter of the alphabet, correct? Aleph is the first letter. So that means the first letter of every single word. If there is ever a Shava underneath the first letter of a word, you must always sound it as a very, very short, reduced sound of the E vowel. Reduced sound. So now, if we take the letter Bet, which is the second letter of the Hebrew alphabet, correct? Second letter. We'll use this second letter Bet to remind us of the number 2. And we'll say if there are 2 Shavas in a row in the middle of a word, it says here, the second one is a Shava Na. If 2 Shavas appear at the end of a word, as in the word aunt, that's a transliteration of someone's aunt. We would say it almost looks like an English ant, right? Like an ant on the ground, but probably like your aunt and uncle. But aunt, it says they are both a Shava Nach. But if it's in the middle of the word, one of the Shavas is going to sound and the other one is not. So it says if there are two Shavas in a row in the middle of a word, the second one is the Shava Na. The second one we sound. Okay? So just keep that in mind. The letter Bet is just to remind you of the second letter of the alphabet, which refers to the number 2. And if you find 2 in a row, if they're in the middle of the word, you sound the second one, but you don't sound the first. It's a Shava Nach, then a Shava Na. And we'll look at an example of that. Then we have the letter Gimel, which is the third letter of the alphabet, but it's also the same letter to spelled Gedolah, like Gadol. Gadol, like Kohen Gadol, the big priest, the high priest. Gadol means to be big, to be large. Gedolah is the feminine form of that. Gedolah. And it is to teach us that a Shava appearing directly after a Tenuah, Gedolah, is a Shava Na. Now you might be asking, what is a Tenuah? That is the official Hebrew word for vowel. So a Tenuah, try that at home. Tenuah just means vowel. A vowel is a Tenuah. A Tenuah Gadol just means a long vowel. So, a long vowel will stand by itself and doesn't need to attach another letter with a Shava. It stands alone. So a Shava appearing directly after a Tenuah Gedolah is a Shava Na. Shava Na. Again, you'll probably need to see examples of this to actually understand it. But we've got 2 more letters. We've dealt with the Aleph, Bet, and Gimel. Now look at the next 2 letters in the alphabet is the Dalet for Dagesh and the He for Hadamot. So let's start with the 4th letter of the alphabet called Dalet. And it will remind us of the Dagesh. Well, the Dagesh is the dot in the center that you see there in the letter Dalet, or all of the Begad Kifat letters. So when we look at these Begad Kifat letters, they all can have a special rule if the Dagesh is in there. The Dagesh. So without going to a full lesson on the Dagesh, let's see if we can see what this rule is. dagesh. A shava under a letter with a dagesh is a shava na. A shava under a letter with a dagesh is a shava na. So if there's a dot in the center of a letter, the shava underneath it should be sounded. It can't be silent. It must be sounded. If it's shava under a letter that has a dagesh, it needs to be sounded. Okay? The final one, and again, this is going to come with a lot of practice. So over the next couple of weeks, we'll use examples of this. But I wanted to lay out the basic ideas here. And again, I can't even get to the other one. I mean, it will take us all night to break down both rules. But let's see if we can just finish this setup. So hadamot in Hebrew literally means the twins. So we have hadamot, the twins. So hey for hadamot, the twins, is when two same letters appear next to each other, two of the same letters, and the first one has a shva, it's a shva na, as in the word hineni. So many of you know hineni means behold, here I am. Hineni. Well, if you notice how it's spelled, it's hey, nun, nun, and then there's a yud. So there's two nuns. We don't normally have two nuns. But the two nuns, just like we have two lameds in hallelujah, hallelu, lelu, lelu, you actually have two nuns here, hineni, hineni. So it says that when there's two letters, these twins of letters, see, hadamot means twins, and the first one has a shva, it is a shva na, as in the word hineni. We'll see if we can look up an example of that just to compare. All right, so that's just some basics there of the shva na. Again, we could go into various rules that I feel like we should save that for next week in depth. But here, let's take a look at a couple examples here of the shva na. So we have shva. Shva is a special vowel that could be a shva na or shva nach. Now, everybody knows this word because we sing it all the time. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Leolam Vayed. And then we go on to the Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha. Again, so I'm not going to say the whole blessing, but if you notice here, the word Shema. Shema. There is a shva under the first letter of Shema. A shva under the first letter of Shema. So we already found out that under the first letter of a word, the shva na, if it's under the first letter, like Aleph is the first letter, that Aleph reminds us, first letter of a word, it must be sounded. So should we sound the shva for Shema? Absolutely. Shema, Shema, Shema. It's short, but it's sounded. Ma, Shema. Shema is hear from Shama, which means to hear. Shama means to hear. So again, Shema, you still pronounce the shva underneath the letter shin. So I usually spell it with the apostrophe in the air, but you can also spell it with an E, S-H-E-M-A, for Shema, Shema. It's short, but it is pronounced. The second example is found in the Torah quite often, and that's lifnei. Lifnei. It means literally from panav, or panai in this case. Lifnei is the lamed in front of the word for face. Some of you are familiar with panim, face. Well, panei would be face of. You put a lamed in front, and remove the dagesh from the letter pei, and it becomes pei, becomes fe. So it's lifnei, which means before or before my face, literally to face someone. Lifnei Adonai is before God. Lifnei Adonai. Lifnei Paro would be before Pharaoh. Lifnei Moshe would be before Moses. Lifnei Yisrael would be before Israel. Lifnei. Notice the glottal stop. Lifnei. Lifnei. So there's a shava under not the first letter of the word, but the second letter of the word. Lifnei, which is the lamed as a prefix in front of the letter pe, which is the word face here, or literally face of. So remember that the lamed we use all the time as a prefix for the word to, a prefix for two or for. In fact, we use the lamed all the time in front of a root, like you see this root here, which is likro. Likro. The actual root is kuf resh aleph, where we get kara, to call. Kara, to call. Kara is the root, and we know vayikra means and he called. We have the yellow vav, which is the prefix for and. We have the yud, which is a prefix of conjugation for he, in front of kara. Vayikra, the book of Leviticus, starts with and he called. So the actual infinitive form puts a lamed in front of the root. Likro. Likro. Likro means to call. To call. So we have a prefix there, but we also have an infix of the letter vav between the second and third letter of the root, which is the resh and the aleph. Because remember, the root is the kuf resh aleph for kara, kara, but we add a vav, or in this case, holam vav, in between those two letters, the resh and the aleph, for likro, likro. So very important when you're understanding how the Hebrew works when it comes to these letters. We have the Shema, we have Lifnei. Now one more. We have Tzedakah. Tzedakah. You probably know Tzedakah as righteousness, or you might know Tzedakah being pronounced as Tzedakah as a righteous act we call giving or charity. Tzedakah. Like the famous Jewish entertainer Neil Sedaka. But tzedakah or tzedakah, or as they say in Israel, stakah, when they're asking for money. Stakah, they're asking for a righteous act of charity. Give money. So they rattle the little cup. Stakah, I want you to put money in their cup. Shekels in their cup. Because they're asking for stakah. That's actually stakah. They're actually pronouncing the shava na very quickly. So instead of saying tzedakah, they're saying stakah. They're actually going very quickly into the dalet for tzedakah, and they're saying tzedakah. So it sounds completely different from an Israeli perspective and the pronunciation than maybe an American Jew that would be pronouncing it almost with equal timing of tzedakah. But that's not correct. It's not tzedakah. It's tzedakah or tzedakah. So it should be pronounced very quickly because it's shava na sounds, but very quick because it is a reduced e vowel. So those are examples of words that we use all the time. Here's a couple others that we'll close out with here today. How about teshuvah? You probably have heard it as teshuvah, teshuvah, which means to return back to God in repentance. It literally is return, like shuv, shuvah Yisrael, return, O Israel. Teshuvah, teshuvah, tshuva. In fact, most rabbis would say tshuva, tshuva. They say teshuva, tshuva. It almost sounds like they're saying tshuva, like you're chewing food, tshuva, but they say tshuva. So it's teshuvah, but it gets slammed together as tshuva. Teshuvah. So again, you'll hear people say teshuvah, you'll hear people pronounce teshuvah, or they'll even say it faster, tshuva. Again, it all depends on where you come from and your background and your heritage. Another word, tefillah, tefillah, tefillah. See how quickly I have to pronounce that short E? Tefillah, 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 tefillah. It all depends on where you're from. You're from New York, you're from Israel, from the South, you're going to pronounce these words differently, even though you're all speaking Hebrew. Tefillah. Or how about tehillah? Tehillah, like Tehillim, praises. Tehillim is the book of Psalms. Tehillah means, I forgot to change the definition there. That's a slide that's incorrect. It says prayer twice. It should say praise. So if you're taking notes, Tehillah is praise. And we've already talked about tzedakah, and that's righteousness. So I'll close out with that idea for today when it comes to the slides. Let's see if we can take a look at the portion here in Exodus 25:2. It says here, see, we'd actually have to start, first of all, if you really do it correctly, start with the very, very first verse there, Exodus 25:1. Vadaber Adonai El Moshe Lemor. You see this all the time in Hebrew. Vadaber Adonai El Moshe Lemor. Vadaber, and he spoke. Who spoke? Yud He Vav He Adonai. El, which means to. Moshe, which is Moses. Lemor, which is to saying or to say. So he spoke. The Lord spoke to Moses saying, or for to say. So basically, we have the first statement here, which we see all the time in the Torah. The second verse, though, we have daber again, speak, but now in an imperative form. Daber, speak. El, to. Bnei Israel, speak to the sons of Israel. What do we speak to them? Here's the letter Vav again, which is and. See, it says ve. V'yikuli is the Vav for a prefix, the Yud for conjugation, he, and here's the root. Here's the kuf, here's the chet, and then there's a vowel here, vechu, and then we add li, to me. Li means to me. Remember, lamed as a prefix is to. The yud is the last part of ani that got contracted with the lamed to make li, to me. So ani is I. Li means to me. So le ani becomes li. When you're looking at this, just so you can understand what I'm referring to, you've got the lamed as a prefix for two or four. And if I add the lamed to the yud, it's from ani, which means to me, li. If I add the lamed to a chasafit and a kamatz, it's lecha, to you. Or for the woman, you'd say lach. So li, lecha, lach. If I add the lamed to a cholam vav, it's lo, to him. Or lah, to her. I overpronounce the hey because the dagesh is in there. Lah, to her. Or lanu, like Natan lanu. You've given us the Torah, to us, right? Lanu means to us. So the suffix at the end, lanu, guess what nu comes from? Anachnu, which is we or us. right? Like Avinu, Malkenu, and Lanu. Lanu means to us. Malkenu means king of us, right? Avinu means father of us, our father. So the us is referring to the we, plural. So Lanu means to us. Anytime you hear Lanu, it means to us. Lachem, to y'all, or you all, to you guys. Or to just women, lachen. Or to them, lahem, lahem, without the ch sound. Lahem or lahen, to them, men and women, or just men, or to them with only females, lahen. Again, some of this is quite advanced, but just notice we're using the lamed contracted with the last part of the suffix for a pronoun to make to me, to you woman, to you male, to him, to her, to us, to you all, to them, masculine or feminine. We just add the lamed to that. So that was basically what I just wanted to share with you, that if you get confused on why it says li, it just means to me. So going back to the text, look what it says. Vayik huli. Notice the hyphen there. Vayikhu means bring, literally, bring, and then li, to me. So this is, and bring to me. Vayikuli. Vayikuli means, and bring to me. What do you bring to me? Terumah. Bring to me an offering. There's no ha terumah, so it's not the offering, it's a offering. So bring to me a offering. Truma or terumah. And then it says me'et. Me'et. So interesting here, et is usually untranslated here. So they have here, speak to the children of Israel, and they bring to me an offering. But really, the et is just there as a direct object indicator that we have a verb and a direct person receiving the action. So again, a rule I can't explain today, but it says kol ish, every man, asher, that, yidvenu, yidvenu. Here's a perfect example of a shava. Yid, yid. Wait a minute. How long is this vowel underneath the yud? Remember one dot underneath the letter? It's just a medium I vowel. So because it's short, when I see the shava following it, I have to attach the dalet to that sound. It's not yide, it's yid. Yid. We're blending these two. Remember how we talked about how if it's under the first, if the vowel preceding the shava is long, we don't blend, but if it's short, we do blend. We're blending this together, yid, yid. It's not yide, it's a shava nach, yid. Yid venu. Yid venu here is referring to the root to be willing to give freely. So it's translated from everyone who gives it willingly or freely. Yidvenu is of the same root as Nadav. Remember Nadav and Avihu, the two sons of Aaron that died because they gave strange fire? Nadav's name means free will. And with his free will, he did something disobedient. And Avihu means, well, he's my father. Because Avihu said, well, Aaron's my father. I can do what he does. No, you can't use your free will because God is your father to be disobedient. So their two names literally refer to the act of disobedience. They were probably drunk in the presence of God and went in and offered unauthorized strange fire on God's altar when that was the job of their father, not them. So Yidvenu means, and he will give freely. Who? Every man. Kol ish asher yidvenu libo. Libo. Wait a minute. Lev is heart. Libo is his heart. So lev is heart, but libo means his heart. See this suffix at the end? Means his heart. And then tikhu. Tikhu is from the same verb root as Vayikuli or Vayiku. Vayikuli. And here we have tikhu. The same root letters for to take. So it says, who gives it willingly with his heart, you shall take my offering. Take his. Et trumati. Take. Et is not translated, but it's a direct object indicator for this object here. My offering. What is my offering? It's truma plus the yud at the end from ani. Truma and then ani contracted to be trumati, which means my offering. So speak to the children of Israel that they bring me an offering from everyone who gives it willingly with his heart. You shall take my offering. Wow. Powerful. Now, let's see if we have possibly a question that we can answer. And we've got Joseph here. So, Joseph, do you happen to have a question?
You said L. L is two, but I thought L also means God. So what's the difference between that?
Very good. So I'm going to go back to this as we close out this last idea that we can get from Blue Letter again. So let's go back to 2. Okay, so here we have L. Okay, but L is actually the word two, very common word in Hebrew. El means two. So remember, El and Elohim are forms of the name of God, but it doesn't really translate to God. We translated God, but it just means strong one. What is the purpose of this strong one? Let's go back for a second to look at the pictographs, because remember, we started with Paleo Hebrew. Let's go to the Lamed for a second. So the Lamed is a prefix, but the Lamed is actually attached originally as the word to the Aleph. So here you have an ox head with an ox goad. Together, it's the strength of the animal being harnessed through the ox goad. So you're getting the ox to do something. So the root obviously is referring to this strong animal who is an ox. The only way to harness the strength of that animal is to use your stick or ox goad to prod him along. So what are you doing? You're getting that strong animal to do something. Well, why is God called El? Because God is the strong one, and he is the one that prods us along to do what he wants us to do. Because remember, in Hebrew, it's not about the form of the name. It's about the function. Once we reduce Elohim, which we translate God, and El, that we also translate to understand the root meaning or the function, then we say, oh, I see where that comes from, the same root. Because it's not that it's really God, it's that God to us is the strongest one in the universe. Therefore, there is no one stronger, which is why his covenants are never broken. But the idea is he's the prime mover and he moves us. He prods us along with his shepherd's staff or ox goad. So even these judges of Israel were called Elohim, strong ones. So every time you see Elohim, it's not always God. Sometimes it's actually gods of the nations that people will put their strength in or put their trust in, because to them, in their culture, those gods or statues are strong ones that have all kinds of power that they attribute to those idols they've created with their own hands. But at the same time, we know really only God is the strong one. But when he gets us to do something, he's harnessing our strength. Does that make sense? So it's really going back to the root letters and what the roots mean, not so much how an individual word gets translated, because it's function over form. All right, I think it's at 8:13. I think I'm at full at this point, and I know it's only a morning time there in India, but it's nighttime for us. So I'm going to go ahead and close out, Joseph. Is that okay? Close out with the Aharonic benediction. So thank you for sharing your question. Come on, stretch your hands for the blessing. Yivarechacha Adonai v'yishmerecha, Ye'er Adonai panav elecha v'nihunecha, Yisa Adonai v'lecha, v'asam lacha shalom. May the Lord bless and keep you. May the Lord shine his face upon you, be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you perfect peace. In the name of Sar Shalom, the Prince of Peace. In the name of Yeshua the Messiah, we pray. B'Shem Yeshua. Amen. God bless you, everyone. Shavua Tov. Have a good week. Shalom, shalom to all of you. Lila Tov, good night, good night. Lila Tov, Joseph, or actually a Boker Tov for you. Good morning.
Yes,
And
Boker Tov.
to all of you, until next Tuesday, see you soon. God bless.